Boker Tov, good morning. Continue with our 3-minute daily dose of Torah. Studying the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, which reads, Moshe kibel Torah miSinai. Moshe received the Torah from Sinai. Interesting phrase, not at Sinai, but from Sinai. An unusual choice. U'Mesara Yehoshua, and he transmitted it to Joshua. Yeshua l'Zakenim, l'Zakenim l'Nevim, l'Nevim Esraelan Sheganas Gadola. And he transmitted it down to the elders, and the elders to the prophets, and the prophets transmitted it to the men of the Great Assembly. What Torah are we talking about that was transmitted? It doesn't seem to be talking about the Torah Shebechatav. The written Torah, you don't need a transmission. It is written and it's there. I mean, you can have a nice ceremony. Moshe could have at the last moments of his life. We know Moshe finished writing a Torah, and Yeshua was declared and appointed. But it doesn't seem that what we're interested in here is, okay, Yeshua now has Moshe Rabbeinu's Sefer Torah. It would be pretty valuable to have that one, right? And that he gave that one to the elders. We're talking about the oral tradition that goes along with the Torah. And we strongly believe in the notion of an oral tradition. It's an essential part of our form of Judaism, in contrast, let's say, to the Tziduki, the Sadducee approach, or the Karaite approach, which limited the rabbinic both creativity and the notion of a transmitted and binding oral tradition. Our assertion is that the Torah came along firstly with explanation. You cannot open up the Torah as a literalist and figure out what's going on. You can't. It's not possible. You know some things, but how to do anything the Torah asks you to do, really limited. You won't know. You won't know anything. The classic example is tefillin. The Torah says you put ot hayalachot al yadecha utotafot beinei necha. Should be a sign in your arm and totafots between your eyes. What's an oat? What kind of oat? What kind of sign? What are totafots? And so we have a tradition. We know Moshe Rabbeinu said, by this we mean those black boxes, the black straps, and these parshiot, these sections put into it. You need an oral tradition, always. Everything, of course, needs a guidance that you have, especially with a sacred text, which is meant to be so rich. There are guidance to do it. And then along with that become not just specific directives about how to do specific things, but principles of interpretation. That becomes a broader discussion about the Chachamim's role and how they approach their work. Interestingly, Masechet Avot is a place where this message is chosen. You could have put it anywhere in the oral tradition. You should have put it back at the very first Masechet. Barachot should have begun with this phrase, that Moshe kibel Torah miSinai, etc., etc. And here we are. We're starting to learn all of the rabbinic tradition. So the argument then seems to be that, and importantly so, is that even though we're going to find here in these Mishnayot teachings about moral character and behavior that are put in people's mouths, any specific Chacham says it, you should know that it's still inspired by an oral tradition about ethics, not just about narrow halachic issues, but the larger ethical questions that Masechet Avot will deal with. That also is part of a tradition from Moshe Rabbeinu that comes down all the way to us. Tomorrow we'll continue with this Mishnah. Have a great day. Please open up and continue. You should study these Mishnayot day by day. Chapter 1, Masechet Avot.